On the evening of the 14th, 15th of November, Germany launched their largest aerial raid of the war on the city of Coventry. Over 500 bombers flew over the city in repeated waves and launched incendiaries and heavy bombs across the city. The bombing actually started at 7:30 in the evening, and the all clear didn't go off until, I think, just before 8 o'clock the following morning. Waves and waves were coming in, one after the other. So it was 12 hours of solid bombing.
I am speaking from the ruins of Coventry Cathedral. 6 weeks ago, the enemy came and hurled down fire and destruction upon our city from the sky, all through the long night. So many lives were lost, so many homes destroyed.
So the BBC every Christmas would have a Christmas Carol service which would be broadcast across the empire. And clearly the obvious place to choose for the broadcast for that year was Coventry Cathedral. And a service was held in the ruins.
And our cathedral nave and chancel utterly burnt and brought to the ground.
Provost Howard famously spoke about building a kinder, more Christ-childlike world.
We are trying, hard as it may be, to banish all thoughts of revenge. We are in brave spirits and can wish the Empire a courageous Christmas. Here around me in the ruins are the few we could muster of the cathedral choir, and they're going to sing our ancient Coventry Carol.
Describe it as much more subdued and subtle. There's a little bit of a haunting tone that's sitting with me in a way I'm not sure what to do with or think about.
You can't have the incredibly hopeful carols that you cling to without having a reason to cling to them, which is being aware of your own weariness.
You have to have the full story of the nativity in the early years of the church. There was good and bad.
That, for me, is actually what this carol's about. When we know that there is darkness and sadness around us, sometimes we just have to sit with that for a bit.
In a way, it's festive, in its own melancholy way.
Welcome to Hark, a podcast about the meaning and the making of our favorite Christmas carols. I'm your host, Maggi Van Dorn, and over the 4 weeks of Advent, we're unwrapping one song at a time. We'll look at the musical development of these jingles, along with the religious and cultural messages baked into their lyrics. And if you can believe it, this is our 5th season of Hark. I want to thank you, our faithful listeners, for another round of caroling. And if you've just discovered Hark, welcome. I know you're going to love this season, and the good news is that we have a whole bundle of episodes from seasons past for you to binge. Hear the stories behind carols like Joy to the World, O Come All Ye Faithful, and In the Bleak Midwinter, just to name a few. On this episode of Hark, we're turning the pages of history all the way back to the 1300s and 1400s, where this carol originated from a series of medieval theater pageants. We'll unpack the dark scriptural tale it tells and how it became an unlikely symbol of Christian hope in the middle of the Second World War. This is the story of the Coventry Carol. Okay, so I have to level with you. This is not a carol I'd heard before this year. And when I first listened to it, I thought, this is a beautiful choral piece that could lull me to sleep, or maybe even contemplative prayer. But what are they singing? Right away, it feels like a lullaby. And because I know it's a Christmas carol, I'm quick to assume the little tiny child must be the baby Jesus. But then, a couple verses in, we hear these lyrics.
Herod the King in his raging charged he hath this day his men of might in his own sight, all young children to slay.
Herod the king in his raging, charged he hath this day, his men of might in his own sight, all young children to slay. This carol is not about the birth of Christ, at least not directly. It's about the terrible events surrounding Jesus' birth, as chronicled in the Gospel of Matthew. That is, the massacre of the innocents.
And this particular scene, which includes the Coventry Carol, a group of women came in, the mothers of Bethlehem, holding bundles of rags that were like babies. And then suddenly a group of soldiers appeared with swords, attacked them. The bundles were thrown to the ground, and actually what we saw looked like human flesh. And, the whole audience utterly shocked. I remember somebody shouting out, "No." It was a visceral and gripping thing. Then we suddenly just plaintively began to hear these words. My name's Richard Cook. I've been ordained nearly 40 years, and all that time I've been working in the Diocese of Coventry, so connected with Coventry Cathedral.
Richard has many connections to the Coventry Carol. He's seen theatrical reenactments of the play that produced the carol, like the one he just described. And he's serving as an Anglican priest in the Diocese of Coventry.
These days, I'm down in a group of villages just south of Stratford-on-Avon. It's a part of the countryside which is very close to the Cotswolds, which I know a lot of people from other parts of the world have visited.
Richard's parish is also where the famous author J.R.R. Tolkien grew up.
And when you know that and you go around our villages, you kind of realize that the houses he describes as hobbit houses were based on these little thatched houses with round windows and very low doorways and things like that. So you kind of half expect a hobbit to appear from one of them from time to time.
Before we go any deeper down the hobbit hole, let's return to the scripture passage that inspired our carol.
So this is from Matthew's Gospel, chapter 2, verses 16 to 18. When Herod saw that he had been tricked by the wise men, he was infuriated, and he sent and killed all the children in and around Bethlehem who were 2 years old or under, according to the time that he had learned from the wise men. Then was fulfilled what had been spoken through the prophet Jeremiah. A voice was heard in Ramah, wailing and loud lamentation, Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be consoled because they are no more.
So this is a scene that has been very dramatically depicted in art and, in our case, music. And I think because it is such a chilling story, we all remember it and know it well. Except that when I began my research on this carol and this story, I saw that many scholars don't necessarily believe that it's historically accurate, that it might have been a literary invention of Matthew. What reasons do you suppose scholars have for thinking this didn't happen, historically speaking?
Yeah. The main reason, I think, is that we don't hear anything about this event other than in Matthew's Gospel. So it's not mentioned in any of the other contemporary sources.
In other words, if the massacre really happened, why is it that only Matthew includes the account in his gospel? Why doesn't Luke mention it? Well, the tricky part of this reasoning is that there are a lot of stories that don't line up across the Gospels. For instance, Matthew mentions Magi following a star, whereas Luke describes shepherds summoned to the manger. A stronger case might be that when we turn to ancient historians like Josephus, who wrote about many events in first century Judea, there's not so much as a footnote about this massacre. But for Richard, the lack of evidence doesn't disprove the possibility that this event occurred.
If you're doing ancient history, then you begin to realize that actually it's very hit and miss what has direct evidence and what doesn't. There's a lot of indirect evidence in favour of this event happening, or at least in favour of it being a very plausible thing to have happened. I think that's probably as much as we can say. King Herod was a pretty awful human being. If you read up some of the stories about him, King Herod is like Henry VIII on steroids, really. Nobody who was close to him was safe. And I think one of the things that you see in that is that Herod's particular fear was other people claiming his throne. He didn't have a direct claim to the throne. He was always worried about people who did. A lot of the murders within the family were of members of the previous royal family. The whole stuff that we get in the Gospels about Jesus being of the line of David would almost certainly be something Herod was anxious about. So if you add those things together, the fact that also Bethlehem at the time would have been a pretty small place. So if the deaths happened as Matthew describes, you're probably not talking about more than 12 or 20 children. That would mean that in the scale of most of Herod's kind of crimes, it was pretty minor. But of course, the people who would remember are the families who'd lost their children. And it's that emotion that the carol picks up, really.
There's another reason why some scholars believe that this massacre is by literary design rather than historical fact.
The suggestion is that actually what Matthew has done, and he's doing actually through the beginning of his gospel, is patterning the story of Jesus on the pattern of Israel.
So the massacre of the innocents surrounding Jesus' birth is meant to echo the story found in Exodus, where Pharaoh massacres the Jewish children in Egypt.
Moses himself, you might remember, is one of the ones who potentially is going to be killed. Pharaoh gives an order that the babies should be killed. In fact, someone takes pity on Moses. He ends up as the baby in the bulrushes and is found by Pharaoh's daughter, and later on realizes that he's part of the nation of Israel.
Certainly, the parallels are there, but Richard isn't convinced this is only for poetic effect.
I mean, I have a kind of a theory that if Matthew was writing a gospel today, he'd be using hypertext in it for his quotations, because I think often what we find with these quotations that appear in Matthew's gospel is that there's much more to them and much greater depth of meaning than we often have noticed.
A reminder that after Matthew describes the massacre, he quotes the prophet Jeremiah, saying, "A voice was heard in Ramah, wailing and loud lamentation, Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be consoled because they are no more."
If you trace back that quotation, which on the surface, fits, well, this is a neat way of underlining the thing. But if you trace it back actually to the book of Jeremiah, the thing that jumps out at you is that that verse is the only one that is about sadness and mourning. All the rest of the chapter is about hope and looking to the future. I think what Matthew's trying to do is to point out to us that even in the depths of that despair, actually there is hope. And the point about it, in a way, is the Herods of this world don't ultimately win, however much pain and suffering we go through. And that is quite an important Christmas message, actually.
This message of hope amid despair is very fitting for Christmas. And Matthew's account of the massacre paints an awfully vivid picture of the violent world Jesus was born into. But we have to admit, this carol brings an unexpected angle to the Christmas nativity story. The usual suspects, shepherds, magi, and the manger scene, are nowhere to be found. So, whose idea was it to make this a Christmas carol?
Actually, I'll start off by saying it's not a Christmas carol.
This is Malvern Carville. He's a local historian born and raised in Coventry. And I actually got to travel to Coventry, England this year to speak to many of our guests on this episode, which was helpful because, as you'll hear in just a minute, this city is chock full of history. And Malvern is the perfect guide.
I'd already been doing a little bit of family history research, and I discovered that my ancestors, the Carvel family, moved to Coventry in the 1770s. They were tailors by trade, and they lived in a historic street called Spon Street, which is just over the other side of the city from us.
Malvern's family boasts some serious genealogical roots in Coventry. But as for the Coventry Carol, that takes us back to the Middle Ages.
So the carol actually evolved through some pageants which were held in medieval times. I think one of the points to say is that very early on, it got considerable royal patronage. In 1218, Henry III, he was crowned in 1216, and he was only 9 at the time. But in 1218, he issued an authority for Coventry to have a great fair.
Wait, so an 11-year-old king was...
I mean, whether it was him or not,
Okay.
The chances are he will have had all sorts of regents and things like that around him who would have said, this is what you need to do. Now, the Great Fair and the day of the Great Fair, well, it's actually a week, it covered the Feast of Corpus Christi. So it was connected religiously, but it was also connected with the trades guilds that were also growing up.
Trade guilds were like the first unions in that they protected the interests of artisans and merchants working in the trade.
So, for instance, you'd have the cooks and the fishermen, you'd have the butchers, the bakers and the millers, but you also had the tailors and shearmen.
In those days, there was a close-knit, even symbiotic relationship between the Catholic Church and the guilds. Merchants supplied the church with cloths, tapestries, stonemasonry, and many churches named a side chapel or creche after these craftsmen and their patronage. In medieval churches that are still standing, you can often see symbols of the trade, literally embedded in stone and stained glass. Anyways, it's the Tailors and Shearmen's Guild who sponsored the Coventry Carol, or rather, the pageant that brought the song to life.
These days, a pageant, we think of a grand exhibition with lots and lots of things going on. The pageant is actually the staging. It's a vehicle, a wheeled vehicle that was pulled along, probably pulled by people, and had a stage erected on it.
Kind of like we would see at Mardi Gras today.
Yes, exactly. So you'd have a large stage with a set on it, and then a play would be performed on that pageant.
The pageant would have ran through Jesus' entire life, starting with the Nativity, but continuing through his passion and death, and even to the end times. So again, not exclusively Christmas themed.
I have actually got the section where the Coventry Carol first comes in and is performed.
Yeah.
So it starts off, Mary, meekly Joseph, my non-spouse, toward that country let us repair. At Egypt to some kind of house, God grant his grace safe to come there. Here, the women, this is the stage note, here the women come in with their children, singing them, and Mary and Joseph got away clean. So that's the point where they escaped to Egypt. And then the first woman says, I lulla my childer wondrously sweet, and in mine armis I do hit keep, because that hit should not cry. The second woman says, that babe that is born in Bethlehem so meek, he saved my child and me from villainy. And the third woman says, be still, my little child, that Lord of Lords save both thee and me. For Herod hath sworn with word is wild, that all young childer slain they shall be.
It sounds like the women are singing lullabies to their babies to keep them quiet, perhaps to hide them from Herod and his soldiers.
That is exactly it. That's exactly correct. So the theme basically is the women, they're clutching their children to their breast and they're saying, quiet, please, don't make a noise. Herod's coming, his men are coming, they're coming to kill you. If you make a noise, it's going to be the end. It's fear. The carol is pure fear.
We don't know who first wrote the Coventry Carol, the text or the tune. What we do know is that Coventry's mystery plays themselves date back to the 1300s and 1400s. The carol appears much later, in the early 1500s, written into the Shearman and Taylor's pageant. As Malvern described earlier, these were lively civic performances that drew huge crowds year after year. But as England moved through the upheavals of the Reformation, the plays found themselves on increasingly shaky ground.
From 1540 onwards, the plays started to become controversial from a religious point of view, because we have Henry, then we have Edward VI, who was Protestant. We then go back to Mary, who is Catholic, and we then go back to Elizabeth, who is Protestant again.
And these plays are controversial because they're too Catholic?
Yes. They quaintly use the word laid down, which basically means put to one side.
And that phrase shows up in the city records. The plays weren't banned outright. They were laid down, quietly set aside as the Reformation tightened its grip on anything that seemed too Catholic. Fortunately, a few years before these plays were suspended, someone bothered to write them down.
There was a chap called Robert Crewe, and he was actually paid by the guilds to write down, transcribe the plays.
Records show that Robert Crewe was heavily involved in the play as an actor and stage manager. And around 1534, he wrote down the text of both the play and the song. Okay, so we have the sheet music here. When is this from?
This is specifically dated the 13th of May, 1591.
Wow. That we have not only the text, but the tune of this song.
Yes. And this was written down by, say, a chap called Thomas Mordyke, who we believe was responsible for trying to organise this play in 1591, and he wrote the music then. Now, we don't know whether this is his original writing or whether it's just him arranging an older carol. I suspect it's him arranging the older carol and he's just setting it to his particular style.
From the late 1500s onward, we don't hear much about the carol. It might have been lost to the ages were it not for the keen interest of a man whose grave is just outside Coventry Cathedral. So, of course, Malvern and I went to pay our respects.
What does the name say?
Thomas Sharp.
Does that ring a bell?
Yes, it does.
So this is the gentleman we have to thank for the Coventry Carol still being available and in existence today.
And he's buried right here.
And he is buried right here.
Yeah.
Underneath rest the remains of Thomas Sharp. I can't read the rest, but... Thomas Sharp was a hatter, and from a very young age, he was a keen historian and antiquarian.
Antiquarian is someone who's interested in antique things?
Antiquities, the actual artifacts, rather than the stories and everything. So,
Sure.
But he went through and he started looking into the old books that he could find. And amongst those books, he found the 1534 transcription by Robert Crewe of the Tailors and Shearman's play and the Weavers' play. So it's around about that point that the Coventry Carol starts to come into consciousness, not just within the city, but starts to reach a slightly wider audience. But even so, not a great deal. We move on then to 1879, and the original manuscripts have all by this point been put into storage in the Free Library in Birmingham, which is about 20 miles away. And there's a fire. And the original manuscripts are all destroyed. Meaning the only record we've got is Thomas Sharp's transcriptions from 1817 and 1825. And this, I think, is the point where it starts to kick off the interest in the carols.
Twice in history, this carol was nearly extinguished. First, through Henry VIII's destruction of Catholic churches and monasteries and his suppression of Catholic-coded arts. Then again, by a fire that destroyed the original transcript. And yet, each time, this song was saved by an ordinary tradesman, rising like a phoenix from the ashes. And what's really interesting is that it actually grows in popularity after the Birmingham Library fire. And it's at this time that the song gets rebranded as a Christmas carol. There would be at least one more moment in history when the Coventry Carol would rise from the ashes. And we'll hear that story after the break. Stay with us. At the beginning of the episode, we heard Malvern describe the German air raid codenamed Operation Moonlight Sonata on Coventry in the middle of World War II.
Over 500 bombers flew over the city in repeated waves and launched incendiaries and heavy bombs across the city.
It was the single most concentrated attack on a British city in World War II, a strike destroying around 2,300 homes, damaging tens of thousands more, and claiming an estimated 568 lives.
Waves and waves were coming in, one after the other. So it was 12 hours of solid bombing.
At the center of Coventry stood the cathedral. It had survived more than 5 centuries of English turmoil. But on this night, incendiaries would set it ablaze.
Provost Dick Howard, who was on fire duty on that evening, went up onto the roof, which was being covered in incendiaries, and together with his team tried to flick the incendiaries off the roof. Unfortunately, they were forced to withdraw as the lead was melting and dross was falling down across the whole of the building.
But as the city was blitzed, people were taking shelter wherever they could. And through that night of bombardment and through that night of horror, of terror, they could still hear the bells of Coventry Cathedral chiming through the night. And so in the midst of all of that, there was this comfort of at least the cathedral's still there, at least the cathedral's still there. But in the morning they found that it was simply that the bell tower stayed standing and the rest of their beautiful cathedral was gone.
This is Kate Massey, Rector of Arts and Reconciliation at Coventry Cathedral. That is, the new cathedral, built 22 years after the medieval cathedral was demolished.
Okay, so we're up in the high altar area of the ruined cathedral, and in front of us we have some stone steps.
She's giving me a tour of the old cathedral's ruins.
We have a stone altar. We have the big empty stone casings of what would have been incredible stained glass windows, but now they're just these kind of skeletal stone arched windows.
It's difficult to convey the power and the pain of this place. I did a fair amount of research before I traveled to England. I read the stories of what happened here, I studied the photos, and yet still, I wasn't prepared to feel what I did looking at the bones of this church.
And behind the altar we have this large wooden cross made of 2 beams lashed together. It's actually a replica of what we called the original charred cross. The original charred cross was something that on the morning after the attack, after the destruction of the cathedral, somebody climbed up into the bell tower, looked down and saw these 2 beams crossed in amongst the rubble, and they took that sign of the cross as a sign of hope in the midst of all the devastation. And then behind the cross and behind the altar we have words kind of carved into the stone in gold, and they say, "Father, forgive."
It's these words, "Father, forgive," that stop me in my tracks. Big capital letters, clear and direct. A petition for forgiveness literally written from the ashes.
Now, these words, at some point after the destruction of the cathedral, we're not entirely sure when. Urban myth says the following morning, but we know it wasn't then. But Provost Howard wrote in chalk just the words, "Father, forgive," on the back wall of the cathedral. It's partly inspired by Jesus' words on the cross. Father, forgive them, they don't know what they do. But he really intentionally left off the then. So it's just Father, forgive, because it's not just about forgiving our enemies. It's about all of us seeking forgiveness for the part we play in the things that damage our shared life and damage the world we share.
Standing in the ruins, looking at Provost Howard's prayer, the Christian message of forgiveness becomes real to me. Of course, to call oneself a Christian, you must be familiar with Jesus' message to turn the other cheek, or to forgive those who sin against you, not 7 times, but 77 times. The cross itself is the ultimate sign of God's love and forgiveness. But it can be a hard message to accept when we are hurting.
I know that what Provost Howard started that day was not popular in some parts of the city. There was a lot of trauma, a lot of hurt. I once spoke to a wonderful colleague, a really gorgeous, saintly man. He was a retired priest and he was such a good friend to me. But he remembered being a young boy the morning after that blitz and saying, "Kate, if I could have found a German, I would have killed them." Not because he was a bad person, but just the trauma and the pain and the violence of what happened had hit them so hard. If we go back to Provost Howard, making that decision to work for peace with somebody who's caused such harm to yourself, to the community you serve and the building you love, the personal strength it must have taken to make that choice is quite astounding. The natural response is to say it's not fair and to push back. Reconciliation is something that can't be known in your head. It's got to be experienced in your heart. What art does is art gives our hearts opportunity to practice the emotions that go with reconciliation, to feel some of those things, lament and hope, despair and love, which are important emotions that we have to cultivate if we're going to do the work of peace building.
Perhaps it is for this reason that the choir sang the Coventry Carol in the ruins for the BBC Christmas broadcast that year. Surely these two, the cathedral and the carol, shared a history together. For 5 centuries, this song and this space were intertwined, and at various points in history, each was consumed in flames. And more than just a storied connection, maybe singing this tale of lamentation allowed people to grieve and make space for the seeds of forgiveness to grow. So let's turn to the music and see what we find there.
Luli, lula, thou little tiny child. Bye, bye, luli, lule. I'm Rachel Mon. I'm the Director of Music at Coventry Cathedral.
Rachel is being modest. Not only is she the Director of Music at Coventry Cathedral, but she has a very impressive pedigree, including being the first female organist at St. Paul's Cathedral, London in 1400 years.
Yeah. So they hadn't had a female organist on staff ever. It never got old, going into work into such an amazing building, and also just having the keys for that building, these heavy old-fashioned keys.
Now, we're, of course, talking about the Coventry Carol, a very old carol that came from Coventry hundreds of years ago. When did you first hear the Coventry Carol?
I confess I cannot pinpoint a date, and that's because I've been in church probably from in utero. I was a church chorister when I was a child, and so it was just a carol that I've grown up with.
Oh, wow.
I've always known it, and I love Christmas, and I love hearing all the Christmas music, and it's very much part of the Christmas tradition for me.
Was it special then for you to come to Coventry Cathedral, where the Coventry Carol originated?
Absolutely. That was like, oh, Coventry. I know Coventry because of the Coventry Carol. Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. It was like coming to a little bit of a famous place, I guess, because of the carol.
Yeah. Okay, well, I've never been in an organ before. Organ, what do we call this? An organ?
This is the organ console, and these are the different keyboards. They're called manuals.
Mm-hmm. If you can't tell, this is Rachel and I sitting at the organ console. A first for me and for Hark. It's not every day that you get an up-close tour of a church organ.
And they each have a name and a function. And the cool thing about the organ is that you can play them in any combination. So you can combine different keyboards. You can put all of them onto one keyboard. Wow. And this is how you get the full organ sound. And then you can add different ranks of pipes to these, which are called stops. So if I pull on one stop, so that says trumpet. So now I can play a trumpet on this keyboard. And so I can put on the flute. Oh my goodness. Or I can put on everything at the same time, in which case, you put on everything and the trumpets, and you have. But that's just one manual. Yeah. So I can add stuff on all the different manuals. So then this is really what the full sound like. Orchestral trumpets on the top manual. And they cut through everything, so you can play at the same time. Anyway, that gives you a little...
I don't think I've ever experienced such power before. You're like so powerful.
Yeah. It's an amazing instrument.
Now, as we know, the subject of this carol is grim. And I'd bet that even without hearing the lyrics, you know that this is a solemn song. But if there's one thing I've learned from 5 seasons of Christmas Carol reporting, it's that the notes and chords that we may register as sad today might not have struck folks as completely sad back then.
I think the way we hear it now is also very different from how medieval or Renaissance ears would hear it. Yeah. So it is modal.
What does modal mean?
Modal is just very roughly, it's sort of an old system of scales, basically. Mm. Now we mostly have music that's in major and minor keys. And modes were slightly different. Some of them are the same as major and minor keys, but some of them are different. So if you listen to a modal scale, it won't sound quite right. It's a way of sort of thinking about it. And also, harmony was different back then. So to us, a major key or a major chord is a stable, solid chord, as is a minor one, just of a different quality. Whereas in the medieval time, that would be considered an unstable chord, and they would have often finish things on an open chord, which is sort of an open fifth, so that third that determines whether the chord is major or minor would have just been missing.
Oh, wow.
And so in this carol, you get a complete mixture of the open chords of the, open fifth, and you get some major chords, but also you get minor chords, so you get a bit of everything.
The other thing is, this song would have been one of a few that was performed in this play, and the arc of the play was everything from the Annunciation to the Massacre of Innocents. And so you're going to hear a big range of emotions within this song, but also the song is in the larger narrative arc. There's theater within this song.
There's theater within it, yeah.
There is also something that I have heard about this song, and I am no music mind, so you will have to explain this to me, but it's called the Picardy Third.
Yes.
Can you tell us what that is?
The Picardy Third. So in music is when something often in a minor key ends suddenly with a major chord. So to us, it's like, oh, it's sad, and then it ends on a happy chord.
Yeah.
Is a very simplistic way of describing it. And this carol is full of them. Again, so it's in a mode, and to us, it mostly probably sounds quite minor, quite dark. But then you'll get the raised third for the final chord of a phrase or of the entire thing. So you get that right at the end. Bye bye luli lulay. On the lay, it's like just a bit of sunshine peeking through. You have that raised third, and so to us it sounds like a major chord. But throughout the whole carol, it kind of keeps switching.
To hear what this sounds like, let's return with Rachel to the organ.
So I'm going to take the first phrase and show you what I mean by that. Here it would sound if I didn't raise the third. Okay, that sounds completely normal and within the key. Now I'm going to raise the third.
And it sounds warmer.
Yeah,
right?
warmer, brighter, we might say happier, but it's kind of a surprising note to put there because that they've raised that middle note. That one used to be that one.
Right.
So that's sort of an example of the Picardy Third, and that happens throughout this piece. So it happens there, and then again in the middle. There it is again. There is one other aspect of the harmony that I could mention. It's not necessarily in every version, but that's a false relation. And that's when you get two notes that are sort of seemingly clashing. So to explain it quite technically, in this, it would be an F sharp in the soprano and an F natural, which is a semitone lower, in the tenor. And those being sung at exactly the same time, it can kind of like make you think like, oh, someone's just sung a wrong note.
Yeah.
But actually it's just like really crunchy and showing the pain maybe of what the subject is. It's a really expressive thing to do and just makes your ears perk up.
What is the text that it's underscoring here, the mood that it's
I think it's
drawing
just the pain of this carol. So it's bye bye luli lulay where it happens.
Okay.
So here it is. So in case you missed it, in slow motion, here's the three chords, so the chords that surround the middle chord with the false relation. Yeah, so you heard that? It's those two notes together. It sounds wrong, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
But it's just adding color to the whole carol.
This is definitely surprising to me as a person not with a musical pedigree at all. I would think that you would avoid discordant sounds whenever possible. But actually, there is a purpose to them.
There is a purpose to them, and there are different rules of harmony as, you know, time progresses and different conventions and how people would use discordant notes. But they definitely serve a purpose. They are part of, I guess, the storytelling of the music. And yeah, they add color, they add mood. It's a very colorful thing to do.
One of the other unusual features of the Coventry Carol is the rhythm and shifts in time signature. You don't need to be able to read music to feel the undulating sways of this song. And that makes sense if we remember that the song was written to emulate a lullaby. The trouble is, it's a lullaby that is anything but steady.
So it's written in a time before we had time signatures and before we had bar lines. So it's a very modern way of thinking about it, is changing time signatures, when actually it was just, I guess you could say, free time.
So let's hear this irregular rhythm on the organ.
A lot of music, you'll have 4 beats in a bar. So it's going to feel like a march. It's going to feel like 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. But this one, it changes every single bar, or you know, nearly. So you'll get 1, 2,
3, 4. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2. 1, 2, 3.
Yeah,
so
that's hard to keep up with.
Right, yeah, and it's changing. So it kind of keeps you on your toes, and it's a bit, I think it lends itself to actually that rocking, but slightly uneven rocking. I'm not sure the baby would like that.
Yeah, not steady. And it's not just the rhythm that rocks in free time. We hear a similar quality in the melody as well.
The melody is centered sort of within a small vocal range, and it is quite simple, although rhythmically, again, it kind of changes. You can sense a sort of rocking motion, I think, with this music, which is good. It's a lullaby. You're rocking a baby to sleep. And then you get the descending lines that kind of have a melancholy quality to them.
Could you read those?
Yeah, like you want me to sing?
Sure, I'd love that.
I don't have perfect pitch, and I have a cold right now. For instance, this poor youngling for whom we do sing. That just very sort of
gently descends.
Yeah, it gently descends, and there's maybe some resignation to it. Also, that's an example of, and there are some different versions maybe, where that last note, it could have been a Picardy Third. This poor youngling for whom we do sing. Sometimes the tune does that.
Yeah.
But in this instance, this poor youngling for whom we do sing. It goes down to the F natural there. And then finishing the tune, bye bye luli lule. And there you have, again, the B natural, so which creates the major chord at the end, when most of this has been in the minor. So if I did that with a B flat instead, it would sound like this. Bye bye luli lule. But whoever wrote this decided no. That it would end
on
maybe
a major.
Yeah, on a major with maybe a bit of hope.
A bit of hope amidst absolute horror and darkness. That's where the Coventry Carol leads us. But as I'm sure you can tell by now, this is no Jingle Bells.
I think the Coventry Carol is a remarkable carol because Christmas is a time we associate with joy, with family, often with children. And it is a time that can seem uncomplicatedly happy. But actually, that's not the world we live in, and that's not the world that Jesus came into.
This is Kate Massey again. She leads the ongoing ministry of arts and reconciliation at the cathedral today. And I asked Kate why she thinks this song continues to be a fitting carol for the season.
So Jesus was born into a time of occupation, a time when his peers were at risk of violence. In his own life later, he experienced, obviously, that same violence. I think for myself, having been a mother, having had that privilege, there's also something incredibly intimate about it, this mother singing to her child. And the way that, parents and carers do when things are difficult, they try to protect their child, to soothe them. They can't stop the bad things happening, but they can be there and hold them. And I think what breaks my heart even more when I think of this carol is that there are mothers and fathers and aunts and godparents around the world today who are soothing their children, who are hungry, who are soothing their children, who are living through conflicts, who cannot keep them safe from the world's dangers, but still are loving them and comforting them in that space. I think it's an incredibly powerful carol from that point of view.
And how does that carol inspire hope?
I think if Jesus is prepared to step into that space, it just brings home that knowledge that no matter where you are, no matter how difficult things are, there is no place where God isn't. And God doesn't leave us in these places of suffering and struggle, but inhabits them with us. And the carol for all its melancholy and for all of its quite challenging and quite grim material within the lyrics, it has that poignant beauty. And again, it sustains our soul, as all beauty does.
Kate isn't just waxing poetic. The ministry she leads of art and reconciliation has been doing the real hard work of peace building ever since Provost Howard committed to a path of friendship rather than vengeance that first Christmas after the Blitz.
And that's what happened. So in 1947, Coventry Cathedral established its first partnership with a church in Kiel in Germany, and then went on to build relationships with lots of other centres in Germany.
What began in friendship has grown into a worldwide network of 280 churches, charities, chaplaincies, peace building and retreat centers, school and other educational organizations that collectively call themselves the Community of the Cross of Nails.
We have a shared symbol of the Cross of Nails, which came from somebody on the day after the bombing picking up a few medieval nails from the roof of the cathedral and binding them into the shape of a cross.
I think it's one thing to strive for forgiveness and reconciliation in one's personal life, but imagining this in the context of a world war is almost inconceivable because, well, you can have a church community that is trying to enact the gospel message. You're living in a world that is on fire, really. How do you think Reverend Howard and the community at that time was able to hold on to a sense of hope rather than futility in the midst of war?
Gosh, I have got no idea. But I think your question, which was apt for them, is also quite apt for us today, isn't it? Because we are looking at a world which is very divided, where conflict is on the rise. And how do we hold on to the aspirations of peace and forgiveness? The important thing actually about Provost Howard, they were able to have that vision of hope and peace and forgiveness. But there was still another 4 years of war to run. So the BBC World Service broadcast their Christmas service from the ruins of Coventry Cathedral. And Provost Howard famously spoke about building a kinder, more Christ-childlike world.
We're going to try to make a kinder, simpler, a more Christ-childlike sort of world in the days beyond this strife.
And that's the quote, that's the soundbite that goes viral. But as my boss, the Dean, often points out, the thing that he says before that is when this struggle is over, when this war is won. And there obviously, in Nazism, was something that had to be overcome as part of building that situation of peace and forgiveness. And so I think reconciliation is always a complex process, because you're holding together things which may not be perfect this side of heaven. We might never get perfect justice, but we've still got to aspire to it. We might never know the whole truth, but we still need to seek truth. We may never love perfectly, but we've got to give it our best shot. So there's all these ingredients that make up reconciliation. Sometimes it can feel kind of conflicted, slightly a compromised space working for reconciliation. But just because we can't do it perfectly doesn't mean to say we shouldn't try.
When emotions are running high, things like forgiveness, or even the theology of the incarnation, God with us, can seem too lofty. So we need a bridge between the terrors of earth and the hope of heaven. We need something to soothe our nerves and calm our spirits. And you know what has been scientifically proven to do just that? Singing. Especially singing with others. Singing stimulates the vagus nerve, the longest cranial nerve in the body, which extends like a superhighway from the brain to various organs and helps regulate our stress response. When you activate the vagus nerve, you're lowering your heart rate, your blood pressure, and cortisol, the stress hormone. I imagine that the first people to discover the benefits of singing were mothers, attempting to soothe their babies to sleep. The calming effect goes both ways, to mother and child. And so There is great wisdom in singing through crises and even about crises. We're not ignoring the pain, but we're also refusing to allow ourselves to be overtaken by it. We're creating space between the trauma and our response, and filling that space with the sweet and sometimes surprising vibrations of song. And so in this way, the Coventry Carol carries us into the Advent season. Hark is a production of America Media, and we are so grateful for the opportunity to make this show for you each year. But you know what? There's a lot of talent, hard work, and dedication that goes into making this podcast. So I've invited our small but mighty team to introduce themselves and say a word about what they do for Hark.
Hello, dear listener. I'm Ricardo da Silva, Hark producer with Maggie. That means I research the carols, edit the scripts, source the music, review the cuts, and find and prepare the unforgettable guests you hear on every episode.
I'm Sebastian Gomes, Hark's executive producer. That means overseeing the whole production and being the podcast's chief advocate.
My name is Kevin Christopher Robles, and I run all the in-studio recordings and help with sound engineering.
This is Will Gualtieri, a Joseph A. O'Hare Fellow at America, and I assist with recordings, music acquisition, and I produce short videos for Hark's promotion on social media.
I'm James Bilodeau, sound designer and engineer on Hark. I help with technical and creative audio to transport you inside the stories of these carols.
A special word of thanks to Miko Zempla for capturing on-the-ground video and audio recordings in Coventry. As you might gather by now, we have an incredible team dedicated to making this show happen. But in a real sense, our team extends even further, thanks to the generosity of so many musicians who offer us their musical gifts each year. Our thanks in this episode go to James Bilodeau, the King's Singers and Signum Records, Brad Prevadoros, Matthew Pierce, Avain Dill, Brad Thiessen, Cynthia Boehner, Salt of the Sound, Coventry Cathedral Girls Choir, and the Choir of King's College, Cambridge. Our theme music was produced by Frank Tucson. And speaking of support, the best way to show yours for Hark is by becoming a digital subscriber to America Magazine. You'll get access to articles about our Christmas carols, along with news and analysis of Pope Leo and the Catholic Church. It's easy to do. Just go to americamagazine.org/subscribe. Lastly, we've created a fun way to play along in our Christmas cheer this season. Each week, we're releasing trivia questions about all the carols featured on Hark across 5 seasons. Because who doesn't love a good holiday brain teaser? This trivia is exclusively for America subscribers. So if you think you know your carols, become a subscriber and play along at americamagazine.org/hark. For America Media, I'm Maggi Van Dorn. Thanks for caroling with us. We'll now conclude this episode with the Coventry Carol, performed by the choir of King's College, Cambridge, singing under the direction of the late Sir Stephen Cleobury, who led the choir for nearly 4 decades. On the next episode of Hark, we're ascending to the heavens.
It's seraphim that Isaiah sees, and they're flying around because they have 3 sets of wings, and they are crying to each other, the Sanctus, the Holy, Holy, Holy.
And we're stretching our lungs to sing one of the most iconic glorias of all time.
Excuse me, 1 syllable, how many notes? 16. Yes, 16 notes.